My name is Esmeralda Kane, I'm 27, and I've lived my whole life in a quiet coastal town in Maine. By day, I work as a junior architect. By night, I tinker with the vintage sailboat my grandfather left me, the one thing that's truly mine. Last month, after a week-long business trip, I pulled into our driveway and froze. The boat wasn't there. The wooden cradle was empty, like it had been ripped out of my life overnight. My mom stood on the porch, sipping tea, and casually said, "Your sister's honeymoon in Greece wouldn't have been possible without that boat. You should be proud you helped her." I felt my chest tighten as my dad added, "Family comes first, Esme. Don't make a scene." I didn't sell it. I didn't even sign anything. So who gave them the right? What would you do if your parents sold the one thing that defined you? For a moment, I couldn't move. My body felt detached, like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. The cradle's outlines were still visible in the grass, flattened patches, rusted chains lying in the dirt, the faint smell of salt still lingering in the air. It was the scent of every childhood summer, of weekends spent sanding the hull with Grandpa, of night sails under lantern light. I dropped my bag and walked toward the empty space, almost expecting the boat to magically appear if I just stared long enough. The air was colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. My mother watched me like someone observing a fussy child. "What the hell did you do?" I finally shouted. My voice cracked in the middle, anger tangled with disbelief. "Lower your voice," Mom snapped. "We did what we had to do. Olivia deserved a proper honeymoon after the wedding. You should be happy for her." "You sold my boat?" Dad stepped forward, arms crossed. "Our boat. Everything here belongs to the family." "Don't act like you're some Lone Ranger." I stared at him, stunned. "No, that boat was legally mine. Grandpa signed it over to me. You can't just—" "Esmeralda," Mom cut me off, sharp and cold. "Stop being dramatic. You're single, you work all the time, and you barely touch that thing anymore. It was just sitting there." Their words hit like slap after slap. The calmness in their voices made it worse, as if they were the rational ones and I was the problem. "You had no right," I whispered. Mom sighed, annoyed. "This conversation is over. It's done. Olivia and Mark are in Greece and they're having the time of their lives. You should be proud that your grandfather's boat is being put to good use." I clenched my fists. "Good use? It wasn't yours to give." Dad raised his voice now, his patience thinning. "Don't push this, Esme. You've always been too attached to that thing. It's time to let it go." Too attached? That thing was the only part of my grandfather I had left. He died when I was 18, leaving me the boat in his will because he said I had his hands and his spirit. I'd spent years restoring it plank by plank, learning how to repair sails, varnish wood, red tides. It wasn't a decoration. It was my anchor. My throat burned. I turned and ran upstairs before I said something unforgivable. My room, though familiar, suddenly felt hostile. I opened my drawer where I always kept the original ownership documents gone. The folder wasn't misplaced. It was gone. My pulse started to race. They hadn't just taken the boat, they'd taken the paperwork. I tore through my desk, my closet, even the little lockbox under my bed. Nothing. Panic morphed into something sharper, fury. Downstairs, I could hear them chatting in the kitchen like nothing had happened. Cups clinking. Laughter, like this was all normal. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. "She'll calm down," my dad said. "She always does." "She's dramatic, just like her grandfather," Mom replied. "He spoiled her." A pause, then Olivia's name came up. "She deserves it. After everything she's been through, she deserves a real honeymoon." "And we got a good price," Dad added. "It all worked out." I gripped the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. A good price. They had turned my grandfather's legacy into a transaction. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at the dinner table while Olivia texted photos from Greece. "Santorini is gorgeous," she wrote in the family group chat. My parents beamed. I typed, "Glad you're enjoying my boat money," but deleted it before sending. They laughed about flight upgrades and spa packages while I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. I wasn't part of this family moment. I was the resource that made it possible. When dinner ended, I excused myself without a word. Upstairs, I sat on my bed, staring at the empty drawer. Something inside me shifted. Until that moment, I'd always tried to keep the peace. I let Olivia take the bigger bedroom when we were kids. I worked through college instead of asking for help. I didn't fight when they used my savings for family emergencies. But this time, they'd crossed a line. This wasn't about a boat. It was about respect, about ownership, about the fact that they thought I would never push back. They were wrong. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my curtains, but it didn't feel warm. My house, the same one I grew up in, felt foreign, like the walls had shifted overnight. I kept replaying their voices in my head. "She'll calm down, she's dramatic, we got a good price." I dragged myself downstairs to the kitchen. My parents were already sitting at the table with their coffee. Mom was scrolling through her tablet, probably looking at Olivia's honeymoon pictures. Dad was reading the paper like nothing happened. "Morning," Mom said casually, without looking up. I didn't answer. I opened the fridge, grabbed the orange juice, and slammed the door a little harder than necessary. Dad lowered his newspaper. "Are you still mad?" I spun around. "You stole from me." He set the paper down slowly, as if he were dealing with a petulant child. "Watch your words, Esme." "They're the right words," I shot back. "You forged my signature, took legal property that belonged to me, and sold it without my consent. That's theft and fraud." Mom rolled her eyes. "God, you sound like a lawyer." "You work with buildings, not boats. Stop pretending this is some big criminal case." "It is a big case," I said through clenched teeth. "You can't just sell something that isn't yours." Dad crossed his arms. "Everything here belongs to the family. That boat was in our yard. Your grandfather built it behind this house. You didn't buy it, you inherited it. That means it's part of the Kane legacy, not your personal toy." I laughed bitterly. "Then why was my name the only one on the ownership papers?" That shut him up for a second, but Mom jumped in immediately. "You know your sister has always dreamed of traveling. She's never had the same opportunities you've had." "Are you serious?" I nearly choked. "She's been handed everything. The car at 16, the private college she dropped out of, the wedding we all paid for, and now this. Meanwhile, I worked my ass off to get where I am. I paid for my own tuition. I saved for years to restore that boat." Mom's tone turned icy. "Esmeralda, jealousy doesn't look good on you." I froze. Jealousy, that was their narrative now. Not betrayal, not theft, jealousy. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "I'm furious." Dad sighed. "We're not doing this again. It's over. The sale is done. Let it go before you ruin family relationships over something you'll forget about in a year." "I will never forget this," I whispered. I left before my hands started shaking again. Upstairs, I grabbed my laptop and opened my email. I searched for anything, scanned copies, old messages, receipts. My grandfather had sent me a PDF of the original transfer document when I was 19, after his lawyer notarized it. I found the email, dated June 14, 2017. Subject, "Keep this safe. It's yours now. Love, Grandpa." I downloaded the file, printed it twice, and tucked one copy into my work portfolio. If my parents thought I would roll over, they were in for a surprise. Next, I drove down to the local marina. The receptionist recognized me. "Hey, Esme, haven't seen you in a while. What's up?" "Someone sold my boat," I said bluntly. "I need to know if there's been a transfer." She frowned and typed into the system. No transfer under your name, but there's a pending ownership change submitted late last week. The signature, well, it's yours, but..." I leaned forward. "But what?" She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Even from a glance, I could tell the signature wasn't mine. It was close, eerily close, but I signed my E with a long loop. This one didn't have it. My heart pounded. They forged it. I asked for a copy and she handed me the printout. "I shouldn't technically give this to you," she whispered, "but this looks shady." "It is shady." "Thank you," I said, tucking the papers into my folder. On the way home, I stopped by Mr. Jenkins' house, our retired neighbor who practically lived on his porch. Always noticed everything. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," I called. "Well, if it isn't little Esme," he said, adjusting his cap. "Where, that beauty of a boat of yours, been admiring her for years." I swallowed. "That's what I wanted to ask you. Did you happen to see anything last Thursday, maybe a truck?" His eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, 2 fellas came by early, flatbed truck, real pros, loaded her up quick. I thought you finally decided to move her to the water." "No, I didn't," he frowned. "Huh, that's odd. They looked like they knew what they were doing. One of them had paperwork. Your dad was outside talking to them." My chest tightened. So Dad was present when they took it, not some misunderstanding. "Do you remember anything else? The truck, the company name?" He scratched his head. "Blue truck. Logo said something like Atlantic Freight. Out-of-town plates, maybe Massachusetts. Sorry, my eyes ain't what they used to be." "No, that's actually really helpful," I said. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins." I drove back home with the copy of the forged signature sitting on the passenger seat. My fingers tapped the steering wheel rhythmically, the way they did when I was mapping out blueprints in my head. Except this wasn't a building. This was a battle plan. I pulled into the driveway, stared at the empty cradle again, and whispered to myself, "They messed with the wrong person." I didn't go back inside right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the forged signature printout. The longer I looked at it, the angrier I became. It wasn't sloppy. Whoever did it had studied my handwriting. My parents hadn't just acted impulsively, they'd planned this. For years, I'd accepted their family-first narrative. I gave up the bigger bedroom so Olivia could have a princess space. I let them use my savings when Dad's business hit a rough patch. I skipped vacations so Olivia could have her destination graduation party. I'd swallowed every unfair thing because I believed keeping the peace mattered. But forging my signature to sell my boat? That wasn't family. That was betrayal. I opened my contacts and dialed a number I hadn't called in a while, Mason Blake, an attorney I'd met through work. We collaborated on permit disputes for a historical renovation project. He wasn't exactly a family lawyer, but he was sharp and, more importantly, discreet. Mason Blake, he answered. It's Esme, I need your legal brain for something personal. His tone shifted immediately. Talk to me. I explained everything, the missing boat, the forged signature, the pending ownership transfer, even the conversation with my parents. There was a long pause. Esme, he finally said, if that signature was forged and they submitted legal paperwork, that's fraud. Depending on the value of the asset, it could be a felony. The boat was appraised at $85,000 last year, I said quietly. Yeah, he said, whistling. That's not a family squabble. That's serious. Do you have proof it's yours? Yes, the original PDF of the notarized transfer from my grandfather. I also have Mr. Jenkins as a witness who saw the truck and my father talking to the movers. Good. First thing, secure every piece of documentation. Don't keep it at the house. If they were bold enough to take the original papers, you can't trust that anything here is safe. Second, we need to find out who the buyer is. Do not confront them yet. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Understood. Also, he added, I'm going to be honest. Family cases get ugly fast. Are you sure you're ready for that? I stared out the windshield at my childhood home. The shutters I painted one summer were faded. The porch swing creaked in the wind. So many memories tied to this place. But those memories didn't erase what they'd done. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. After hanging up, I gathered every document I could find, old receipts from the restoration work, insurance appraisals, email threads with the marina, even photos of me and Grandpa working on the boat. I organized them into a binder like I was prepping for a project presentation. The habit gave me a sense of control, something I desperately needed. By mid-afternoon, I drove to my office and locked the binder in my work cabinet. I also uploaded encrypted copies to cloud storage. If my parents thought they could make this disappear, they were wrong. On the way back, I stopped at the public records office. If the sale had been registered, there would be a paper trail. The clerk, a woman with thick glasses and a bored expression, took the details I gave her and disappeared into a back room. 15 minutes later, she returned with a thin folder. Inside was a single sheet, bill of sale. My eyes scanned the page. The seller section listed my name and signature. The buyer section listed Charles Beaumont, a man I didn't know, with an address 2 towns over. The sale price, $75,000. Cash. I gritted my teeth, so they undersold it too. Can I get a certified copy of this? I asked. $5, she said. I handed her the cash, my fingers trembling. Back in my car, I Googled Charles Beaumont, Maine. Dozens of hits popped up. He was a wealthy businessman, owner of a chain of marinas and seafood distribution companies. A picture of him shaking hands with the governor stared back at me from a news article. This wasn't some random buyer. This was someone with power. I felt a mix of fear and intrigue. Why would someone like him want my boat? That night, dinner was worse than the night before. Mom acted like everything was normal, asking me about work. Dad commented on the weather. Olivia sent another batch of honeymoon pictures, this time from some cliffside restaurant overlooking the Aegean Sea. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the certified copy of the bill of sale right in the middle of the dinner table. What's this? Dad asked. I sat down slowly. A copy of the sale contract you forged. Mom's face hardened. Where did you get that? It's public record, I said flatly. Nice touch with the fake signature. You almost got the loop on the E-right. Dad's nostrils flared. Watch yourself. No, I snapped. You watch yourself. I talked to a lawyer today. This isn't going away. The air in the room shifted. Mom's smile vanished completely. Dad leaned back, arms crossed, the way he did when he was trying to intimidate me as a teenager. But I wasn't 16 anymore. I'm giving you a chance, I said quietly but firmly. Tell me the truth, all of it. Who signed the papers? How did you get them notarized? Why Beaumont? Dad's jaw tightened. You don't understand the bigger picture. Then explain it, I shot back. Neither of them spoke. For the first time in my life, I saw something unfamiliar in my father's eyes, not authority, not annoyance, but fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about money. There was something else behind the sale. That night, sleep refused to come. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window sounded like an accusation. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, my thoughts spiraling. When I was little, I used to love nights like this, quiet coastal nights where you could hear the waves if you opened your window wide enough. Grandpa would sneak me out to the backyard, wrap us both in wool blankets, and tell me stories about his sailing days. He used to say, "The sea doesn't lie, Esme. You can fool people, but not the wind." I got out of bed, barefoot, and went outside. The night air was sharp, smelling of salt and pine. I stood in the empty space where the boat had been, arms wrapped around myself. My breath came out in little clouds. Without the boat, the yard looked wrong, unbalanced. I crouched down and ran my fingers over the metal chains that used to hold the cradle in place. Bits of wood and varnish clung to them. I remembered sanding those planks with Grandpa when I was 14, him insisting I learn to feel the grain rather than just see it. He treated me like an apprentice, not just a granddaughter. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. It wasn't just an object they'd sold. They'd taken away a piece of my identity and done it with smiles on their faces. Inside, the house felt suffocating. Family photos lined the hallway. Olivia in her prom dress, Olivia at graduation, Olivia and Mom hugging on the porch. I was in some of them, always at the edges. In the living room, the TV was off, but the light from the street lamp fell across the mantel where Grandpa's framed photo sat. I walked over and picked it up. His kind eyes stared back at me. The last thing he said to me before he died echoed in my head. "Don't let them steer your ship, Esme. You've got hands made for the helm." I whispered, "I'm trying, Grandpa, I really am." The next morning, the house was buzzing again, but not with warmth, with calculation. I overheard my parents in the kitchen whispering. "She's serious," Mom said. "She won't do anything," Dad replied. "She never does." "She talked to a lawyer." Silence. Then Dad's voice, low and sharp. "Then we'll handle it. She's not ruining Olivia's future over a damn boat." My hands clenched. "Handle it?" I walked in, deliberately making noise so they'd know I'd heard. Mom jumped a little. Dad forced a smile. "Morning." I poured myself coffee without saying a word. The tension was thick enough to slice through. Mom tried to fill the silence. "We're having Olivia and Mark over when they get back from Greece. Family dinner, you'll be there, right?" I almost laughed. "Sure," I said flatly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I wasn't agreeing. I was planning. After breakfast, I drove out to the marina Beaumont owned. I needed to see who I was dealing with. The place was massive, rows of pristine yachts and fishing vessels, a clean, whitewashed office building with glass walls. It was a different world from our sleepy town. Inside, a receptionist greeted me. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Mr. Charles Beaumont regarding a recent boat purchase," I said, pretending to be calm. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not yet," I said, flashing my architect's business card. "But I work in coastal property design. I think he'd want to talk to me." She eyed me suspiciously but made a call. After a moment, she said, "Mr. Beaumont can give you 10 minutes. Upstairs, third door on the left." My heart pounded as I walked up the stairs. 10 minutes with a man who unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, owned my stolen boat. His office was big but simple. Nautical charts lined the walls. A model schooner sat on a side table. Beaumont himself was in his 60s, tanned, fit, with piercing gray eyes that made you feel like you were under a microscope. "Miss Kane," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I froze. "You know who I am?" He smiled faintly. "Of course, your grandfather and I sailed together for nearly 30 years. He talked about you all the time, said you had his stubborn streak." That threw me off. "Then why did you buy it?" He leaned back. "Because I received a letter. Handwritten by your grandfather, sealed. Your parents brought it to me when they offered the boat." My stomach flipped. "A letter?" "Yes," it said, and I quote, "If Esmeralda ever gives up this boat, I trust you to keep her safe. She belongs with someone who understands her." My voice shook. "I didn't give it up." "I know," he said calmly, "which is why I haven't moved her from storage. She's safe, Esme, but you need to understand your parents convinced me that you signed the sale. They brought notarized documents. I don't buy stolen goods." I swallowed hard. "Can I see the letter?" He opened a drawer and handed me a photocopy. Grandpa's handwriting was unmistakable. The letter was real, but the situation it described wasn't. "They tricked you," I whispered. He didn't argue. "I'm not taking sides yet, but I will tell you this. Your grandfather trusted you to fight for what's yours. If you walk away, the boat stays with me." His words hit like a challenge. As I drove home, the ocean flashed beside the highway. The line between my family and my grandfather's legacy was becoming clearer by the mile. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal. I was dealing with a test Grandpa set long before he died, and I intended to pass it. By the time I got home from Beaumont's office, my hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. The game had changed. Grandpa's letter, Beaumont's words, the forged documents, all of it painted a clear picture. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated. The house was empty when I arrived. For once, that was a relief. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, the same one I used for drafting blueprints, and started outlining everything I knew. Timeline: Thursday morning, boat taken by Atlantic freight truck. My parents present during pickup. Forged signature submitted to Marina and County office. Sale made to Charles Beaumont for $75,000 cash. Letter from Grandpa used as emotional leverage. Key leverage points: legal ownership via notarized document. Forged signature equals felony. Witness: Mr. Jenkins. Paper trail, bill of sale, notarization, forged forms. Buyer isn't complicit but watching. I stared at the list for a long time, then underlined 3 words at the bottom: they underestimated me. For 27 years, my parents treated me like the steady one. The responsible daughter who didn't need attention, the one who could handle herself. They leaned on me, dismissed me, and quietly expected me to pick up the slack. They thought I'd grumble and then fall in line like always. Not this time. That night, I went up to the attic, a place I hadn't visited in years. Dust hung in the air like fog as I pushed open the creaky door. Grandpa's old sea chest sat against the wall. Inside, I found boxes of boat parts, weathered journals, and old photographs. One journal in particular caught my eye. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but Grandpa's handwriting was still bold. I flipped through it and found passages about the boat, about our summers together, and about trust. Legacy is not about money, it's about who you trust to carry it forward. I closed the journal, my chest tightening with a mixture of grief and resolve. Over the next few days, I became methodical. Every lunch break at work, I scanned legal websites, called marinas, looked up Atlantic Freight's transport logs. I found the exact truck that picked up the boat and filed a public records request for the bill of lading. Mason, the lawyer, guided me on what documents to secure and how to quietly prepare a legal case without alerting my parents too early. Meanwhile, at home, the tension was palpable. My parents had no idea I'd met Beaumont. They assumed I was bluffing. Mom hummed in the kitchen like nothing had happened. Dad spent more time in his study, avoiding my eyes. On Friday evening, Olivia and her husband Mark returned from their honeymoon. The family dinner Mom had mentioned earlier was happening whether I liked it or not. I considered skipping it, but then I thought of Beaumont's words. Your grandfather trusted you to fight for what's yours. So I showed up. The dining room was dressed to impress. Candles, fine china, a centerpiece of flowers. Olivia swept in wearing a white linen dress, tan lines glowing, her hair perfectly done. Mark looked like he just walked out of a yacht catalog. "Esme," Olivia squealed, hugging me like nothing had happened. "You have to see the pictures. Greece was magical." I stood stiff. "I'm sure it was." Dad raised a glass. "To family," he said, looking right at me. I held my glass but didn't drink. Dinner started with forced small talk. Olivia recounted their adventures. Sunset cruises, private beaches, expensive dinners. Every word landed like a stone in my stomach. It wasn't jealousy. It was the cruel irony that she'd enjoyed all of it on the back of something stolen from me. Halfway through the meal, Mom decided to address me directly. "Esme, honey, we know you're upset, but can't you see this as a blessing? The boat went to someone who appreciates it, and your sister got the honeymoon of her dreams. Everyone wins." I set my fork down slowly. Everyone except me. Dad's smile tightened. "Esme?" "No," I said firmly. "You all think this is over. It's not. You forged my signature, you stole my property, you sold it behind my back, and now you're sitting here pretending everything's fine. It's not fine." Olivia's face fell. "Wait, forged?" I looked at her. "Did you honestly think I agreed to this?" She glanced at Mom and Dad, confused. "They said," "Exactly," I cut in. "They said they lied. And you were happy to believe it." The table went silent. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Dad leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Watch your tone." I leaned forward too. "No, you watch yours, because this," I gestured to the table, "the house, all of it, is about to change." Mom opened her mouth, but I stood up before she could speak. "I'll be in touch, through my lawyer." The scraping of my chair echoed through the room as I walked out. Their shocked faces burned into my back. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I felt like the storm. Outside, the night air was cold, but I felt steady. I drove away from the house with the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair like it used to when Grandpa took me sailing. They thought they could rewrite my story without me. They were wrong. The Monday after that dinner, I woke up before dawn. It wasn't because of anxiety anymore, it was focus. Something in me had shifted during that dinner, the way a storm front shifts the air. I wasn't reacting now, I was planning. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and reviewed the binder I'd assembled. Every document was in chronological order: notarized transfer papers, appraisal reports, insurance policies, transport records, and now Beaumont's letter copy. If I looked at it like a case study at work, it was airtight. The only thing left was to pull the legal trigger. Mason called me that morning. "I've gone through everything you sent," he said. "It's clean, you have a strong fraud and conversion case. Honestly, if this were anyone but your parents, I'd say we file today." "It is my parents," I reminded him softly. "Yeah, which means two things. One, we need to be thorough because they'll fight dirty to avoid embarrassment. Two, you need to be emotionally ready for how ugly this can get. It's one thing to sue a stranger. It's another to sue the people who raised you." I stared at my reflection in the black laptop screen. They stopped acting like parents when they forged my name. Mason didn't argue. "Fair, so here's my plan. First, we file a demand letter, a formal legal notice that gives them a chance to return the property and settle before litigation. It puts them on record. Then, if they ignore it or retaliate, we file the lawsuit." "I want to do it," I said without hesitation. He exhaled. "All right, I'll draft it today. You'll need to sign tomorrow." As soon as I hung up, my phone buzzed again. "Mom." I almost didn't answer, but part of me wanted to hear what new narrative they were building. "Esmeralda," she began, her voice deceptively sweet. "Your father and I have been talking. We think you're overreacting. This is a family matter, not something to drag lawyers into." I held the phone to my ear, silent. She took my silence as permission to keep talking. "If you want, we can talk about some kind of reimbursement, maybe part of what Beaumont paid. But suing us, that's cruel." "Cruel?" My voice came out low, controlled. "You forged my signature, sold something that wasn't yours, and lied to my face. You don't get to redefine cruel." "Esme, you're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said, slipping into that polished, manipulative tone I knew too well. "Olivia was devastated when she found out you were threatening to sue." "Do you really want to tear this family apart over a boat?" "It's not just a boat," I said. "And I didn't tear this family apart, you did." Before she could respond, I hung up. I wasn't naive, I knew this was just the beginning. When my parents felt cornered, they didn't apologize, they strategized. Sure enough, by lunch, my phone started buzzing with relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda left a voicemail about how family should forgive. Uncle Rob texted me a vague, passive-aggressive line about loyalty. My cousin Lee DM'd me on Instagram. "Are you really suing your parents?" They were rallying troops. Classic. Meanwhile, I had my own troops to assemble. I emailed Mr. Jenkins to formally ask if he'd be willing to give a statement. His reply came within an hour. "Of course, Esme, your grandfather would want me to." That nearly brought tears to my eyes. At work, I quietly pulled a trusted colleague aside, Clara, a fellow architect who'd been through a nasty inheritance dispute with her own siblings. She was blunt but kind. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "People romanticize family, but when there's money or legacy involved, masks drop fast. Protect yourself." Her words stuck with me all day. That evening, I came home to find Dad waiting in the living room, arms folded. He looked like a man preparing for a negotiation, not a father trying to make peace. "Sit," he said. "I didn't say what you need to say." He gestured toward the couch, but when I stayed standing, he sat down himself. "You're throwing away everything we built as a family." "You mean everything you built on top of what wasn't yours?" I replied. His jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. You're being influenced by outsiders, lawyers, that neighbor, even that old man Beaumont. You think they care about you." "They care about your boat? You're being naive." I laughed sharply. "I restored that boat myself. I paid for the materials. I did the work. I'm not naive. I just finally stopped pretending your version of family is fair." For the first time, his voice cracked slightly. "You're my daughter." "And I was your daughter when you signed my name behind my back," I said softly. He had no answer to that 2 days later. Mason sent me the draft of the demand letter. It was formal, cold, and devastating. To Mr. and Mrs. Kane, this letter serves as formal notice regarding the unlawful sale of the 1969 Eileen sailboat. It detailed everything: ownership, forged signature, buyer identity, legal consequences, the demand for immediate return or restitution. At the end, it gave them 10 business days to comply before legal action would be filed. Reading it made my stomach flip, not because I doubted my decision, but because the weight of it was real now. This wasn't family drama whispered over dinner anymore. This was law. I signed it without hesitation. Mason mailed it the next morning, certified. That weekend, the family war went public. Not because of me, but because Olivia posted a photo on Instagram of her and Mark toasting champagne on their honeymoon, captioned, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for making our dreams come true. Someone in town, probably one of Mr. Jenkins's chatty friends, connected the dots." Comments started pouring in. "Wait, isn't that Esma's boat money? I heard there's a legal thing happening. Yikes, family drama." By Sunday, Mom called me again, this time furious. "Do you see what you've done? People are talking." "I didn't post anything," I said calmly, "but actions have consequences." "This isn't just about you," she snapped. "This is humiliating for all of us." "Then maybe you shouldn't have committed fraud," I replied and hung up. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Grandpa's journal open beside me. I traced the ink of his handwriting with my finger. The sea doesn't tolerate half measures. Neither would I. The demand letter landed on their doorstep on a gray Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but I imagined the scene vividly. Dad opening the envelope at the kitchen counter, his face tightening with each line he read. Mom hovering behind him, realizing for the first time that this wasn't just some Esme tantrum, this was real. I was at work when my phone started vibrating relentlessly. First Mom, then Dad, then Olivia, then Mom again. I silenced it all. I had a meeting with a client, and for the first time I refused to let my family chaos bleed into my career. When the meeting ended, I checked my voicemail. Mom's message came first, breathless. "Esmeralda, how could you do this to us? A letter from a lawyer? Your father is furious. You're making a mistake. Call me back immediately." Dad's voice followed, low and controlled like he was preparing for a chess match. "We need to talk. In person. Tonight. Don't avoid this." Olivia's message was confused more than angry. "Esme, Mom and Dad are freaking out. What's going on? They said something about a lawsuit?" "Call me, please," I exhaled slowly. This was exactly what Mason had warned me about. Once the legal process started, the emotional manipulation would escalate. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove to the marina instead. The wind was sharp, whipping across the docks. I walked to the storage lot Beaumont mentioned. And there she was, the Eileen. Wrapped in canvas, sitting proud and silent. I pressed my hand against the side of the hull. The wood was cold under my palm, but solid. She was safe. That alone gave me strength. I stayed there for almost an hour, sitting on a crate, breathing in the salt air. When I finally checked my phone, there were 12 new messages and 3 missed FaceTime calls. I texted Olivia, "I'll talk to you tomorrow, not Mom and Dad, just you." She replied within seconds, "Okay." Lunch. The next day, we met at a cafe near the office district. Olivia showed up wearing oversized sunglasses and a worried expression, like someone stepping into a courtroom without knowing the charges. She ordered a latte but didn't touch it. "What's going on, Esme?" she asked, leaning in. "Mom says you're trying to sue them. Please tell me that's not true." "It's true," I said calmly. Her jaw dropped. "Why?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why do you think?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't know about the forged signature. I thought you agreed to sell the boat for me for us. That's what they told me. I swear I didn't know." I believed her. Her voice cracked on the word swear. Olivia had always been spoiled, but she wasn't a liar. She was a follower. "They lied to you," I said. "Just like they lied to me, and now it's serious. That letter they got, it's not a bluff. If they don't fix this, it's going to court." Her eyes widened. "Court, Esme, that will destroy everything. The family's reputation, Dad's business, Mom's image in town. They should have thought about that before committing fraud," I interrupted. "Actions have consequences, Liv." She fidgeted with her ring. "Is there any way this can end without, lawsuits?" "Yes," I said. "They give back what they stole. They make it right, not hush money, real accountability." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "They're terrified, not of you, of people finding out." I tilted my head. "Good, they should be." Before we parted, Olivia grabbed my wrist. "Please don't shut me out. I didn't ask for this." "I'm not shutting you out," I said, "but I'm not protecting them either." That night, I got home to find both my parents waiting in the living room, the letter spread out on the coffee table like evidence in a crime scene. Dad didn't waste time. "This is your last chance to stop this madness." "It's not madness," I replied evenly. "It's accountability." Mom jumped in, voice trembling but sharp. "Do you realize what you're doing to this family? People are talking. Olivia's upset. We raised you better than this." I laughed bitterly. "You raised me to clean up your messes, not this time." Dad stood up suddenly, looming over me. "It used to intimidate me when I was younger. It didn't anymore." "We can fight this," he said. "We have resources. Don't think you'll win just because you have a lawyer." "You think I care about winning?" I shot back. "I care about truth. I care about the fact that you forged my name and sold my inheritance. This isn't a family disagreement. This is criminal." His face darkened. "Then I guess we're enemies now." For a second, the words hung in the air like smoke. Enemies, coming from my father. Mom whispered, "Don't say that," but he didn't take it back. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. "No," I said, turning to face him. "You said it perfectly." The next morning, Mason called again. "They hired counsel," he said. "It's a firm I know, old school, aggressive. They're not rolling over. Be ready for intimidation tactics." "Already started," I muttered. He outlined the next steps: depositions, discovery, the possibility of mediation. "Don't let their lawyers guilt you into dropping this. That's a common move in family fraud cases." I assured him I wouldn't. Later that day, Olivia called again. Her voice was shaky. "They're bringing me into it," she whispered. "Want me to give a statement that you verbally agreed to the sale?" My stomach turned. "And are you going to?" "No," she said quickly. "I mean, I don't remember you ever agreeing. But they keep saying if I don't back them up, I'm betraying the family. I don't know what to do." "Tell the truth," I said. Silence. "Liv," I added gently, "this is the moment. You've spent your whole life letting them script your part. This time, you get to choose your own lines." When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier. "Okay, I'll tell the truth." I knew it wouldn't be that simple. My parents weren't the type to give up easily, but something had shifted. For the first time, Olivia wasn't just their golden child, she was standing on her own, however shakily. That evening, as I walked by the ocean, the wind picked up. The waves crashed harder than usual, spraying cold mist into the air. I closed my eyes and let it hit my face. Grandpa used to say storms revealed character. Theirs was being revealed. And so was mine. The letter had been their first warning shot. Their counterattack came faster than I expected. 3 days after Olivia's lunch with me, Mason forwarded me a PDF. "They've responded," he said, "and it's aggressive." The letter from their law firm was full of legal jargon, but the tone was unmistakable: condescending, dismissive, and threatening. They claimed that I had verbally consented to the sale during multiple family discussions, and that the notarized paperwork was lawfully executed. They even implied that I was retaliating due to personal grievances, and that my conduct was causing reputational damage to the family. "They're going for character assassination," Mason said bluntly. "Classic move. Undermine the plaintiff, muddy the waters, make it look like a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion." I felt my throat tighten. "They're calling me a liar. They're painting a narrative," he corrected. "Don't take it personally, Esme. This is what they do when they can't argue the facts." But it was personal. These weren't strangers. These were the people who raised me. 2 days later, I walked into the local grocery store to grab some coffee beans, and the cashier, a woman I'd known since high school, gave me a hesitant smile. "Hey, Esme, how's everything?" Her tone was careful, too careful. I didn't answer right away. A woman behind me whispered to another, not realizing or not caring that I could hear, "That's the one suing her parents. I heard she kicked them out of their own house. Ungrateful after everything they did for her." I kept my head up, paid for my coffee, and walked out without a word. But inside, my stomach churned. This was how it began: small-town gossip spreading like oil on water. By the end of the week, I couldn't scroll through Facebook without seeing veiled posts from distant relatives about children who forget their roots and family shame. Mom had clearly been making calls. Meanwhile, their lawyers didn't waste time. I received a formal notice of deposition scheduling. They wanted to depose me in 2 weeks. Mason assured me it was normal, but the thought of sitting across from their attorney, with my parents in the room, made my chest tight. "They're trying to rattle you," he said. "They know the facts aren't on their side, but if they can make you look emotional, inconsistent, or unstable, they'll use that." "I'm not scared of the facts," I said. "I'm scared of them twisting everything I say." Mason gave me a reassuring look. "That's why we prep. They won't get to twist a thing." One evening, as I was reviewing documents at my dining table, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Olivia stood there, pale and trembling. "Can I come in?" Whispered. I let her in. She paced nervously, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. They're going nuts," she said. "Dad's talking to reporters. Mom's calling every relative. They're saying you're trying to destroy them." My stomach dropped. "Reporters?" Some local journalist reached out for comment about the lawsuit. Dad said, and I quote, "It's a tragic misunderstanding. We love our daughter, but she's being manipulated by outsiders who want to tear our family apart." I nearly laughed. "Manipulated? By who, my lawyer? Reality?" She flinched. They've always been good at spinning stories, but this is different. They're scared. I sat down heavily. Yeah, and when they're scared, they smear. Olivia hesitated, then pulled up her texts. They also asked me to give a statement saying you agreed verbally. I told them I wouldn't. Dad flipped, said if I don't back them up, I'm choosing you over the family. And what did you say? Her eyes met mine. For the first time, they didn't look like the wide, spoiled eyes of the golden child. They looked tired. I told him the truth is choosing family. He didn't like that. A strange wave of pride swelled in me. Olivia wasn't perfect, but she was finally seeing them clearly. Liv, I said softly, things are going to get uglier. They're not above dragging both of us through the mud if it keeps them looking clean. You need to be ready. She nodded, but her hands were still shaking. I hate this, she whispered. I hate watching them turn into these people. They've always been these people, I said gently. You're just finally seeing it without the sugarcoating. The next blow came the following week. A local paper ran a story, Family Feud over Classic Boat Turns Legal, Kane versus Kane. The article was surprisingly detailed, citing public filings and statements from a source close to the family. It mentioned my lawsuit, the value of the boat, and Beaumont's involvement. But the kicker was the last paragraph. The parents maintained that Esmeralda Kane had verbally agreed to the sale and has been influenced by outsiders. We love our daughter, Mrs. Kane stated tearfully, but she's not herself lately. Reading that felt like being punched. She's not herself. It was the oldest trick in their playbook, painting me as unstable, emotional, someone to be pitied rather than believed. I called Mason immediately. He'd already seen the article. Don't respond publicly, he advised. Not yet. The facts will speak in court. If you start arguing in the press, they'll turn this into a circus. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into my parents' house and shove the article in their faces. Instead, I sat alone at my kitchen table, fingers digging into the wood. This was the price of standing up to them. A few nights later, Olivia showed up again, this time with a small box. This was in Mom's closet, she whispered. I don't think they meant for anyone to find it. Inside were draft copies of the forged sale documents, early versions of the signature. They'd practiced. My own parents had practiced forging my name like art students tracing a masterpiece. I stared at the pages, numb. This is Liv, this is gold, this proves intent. I know, she said. I couldn't keep watching without doing something. I hugged her. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. But hope didn't mean the storm was over. The next morning, I received a subpoena for my financial records, a clear intimidation tactic from their lawyers. They wanted to comb through every bank statement, every paycheck, every expense, hoping to find anything they could twist into a narrative of greed or instability. I called Mason. He sighed. They're playing dirty just like we expected. But don't worry. You've got nothing to hide, and everything they're doing is predictable. Still, as I sat on my couch that night, staring at stacks of bank statements, the weight of it hit me. They were my parents, and they were trying to destroy me. I closed Grandpa's journal, took a deep breath, and whispered into the quiet, "You picked the wrong daughter to underestimate." The moment Mason filed the motion for a preliminary injunction, everything changed. The game stopped being emotional and became surgical. Cold, tactical, legal. The motion asked the court to preserve the boat, prohibit any transfer or modification, and require both parties to submit full documentation related to the sale. Attached were Olivia's photocopies of the draft forgeries, several sheets of my name, traced over and over like a deranged art project. Mason's cover letter was concise. These documents, retrieved from the defendant's residence, indicate deliberate forgery of the plaintiff's signature, not an accidental miscommunication. Their admission is critical to the preservation of the contested property. The response from my parents' lawyers came within hours, full of bluster, indignation, and classic deflection. The plaintiff's claims are malicious and unfounded. These documents were unlawfully obtained. Any injunction would cause undue hardship to the defendants. They weren't arguing facts. They were trying to shake us with volume. Whitman, their lead attorney, requested an emergency meeting. We met at his firm's downtown conference room, glass walls, polished floors, walls lined with expensive legal diplomas. Mom sat stiffly beside him, hands clenched in her lap. Dad looked like he was at a board meeting, not facing accusations of fraud. I sat across from them with Mason, who radiated quiet confidence. Whitman started like a sledgehammer. "This motion is an outrageous escalation," he said. "You're turning a family disagreement into a federal case." Mason didn't blink. "Forgery and conversion are escalations. We're simply matching the level." Whitman shoved the folder of forgery drafts toward us. This evidence was stolen from their private home. It's inadmissible. It was found in my mother's closet, I said evenly. In my house, by my sister, you can call it whatever you want. The court will call it evidence. Dad snapped. Esme, stop this nonsense. You're humiliating yourself. I leaned forward. No, Dad. You humiliated yourself the moment you practiced my signature like a middle schooler cheating on a spelling test. For a second, something cracked in his expression. Whitman cut in before he could speak. Even if these drafts are authentic, they don't prove who signed the final sale document. Mason smiled, the way a chess player does when the board is already won. Combined with the disappearance of the original title, the rushed notarization, and your client's presence during the transport. Oh, they prove plenty, enough to make a judge very curious. Whitman shifted. He knew it too. A week later, we had the injunction hearing. It wasn't a full trial, just a preliminary argument, but it felt monumental. I wore a black blazer that still smelled faintly of sawdust from the attic, like Grandpa was there with me. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with a faint echo that made every sound feel amplified. My parents sat at the defendant's table. Mom avoided my eyes entirely. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Olivia was in the back row, her face pale but determined. Whitman opened with his practiced theatrics. Your Honor, this is a sad family misunderstanding being weaponized by legal overreach. My clients love their daughter. They believed in good faith that they had her consent. These claims of forgery are exaggerated and unproven. Mason stood, calm and precise. Your Honor, what's exaggerated is pretending multiple forged drafts of a signature magically appeared in a closet. What's unproven is their supposed verbal consent, for which there is no recording, no email, no witness. What is proven is that this boat is legally titled in my client's name and was sold without her authorization. This injunction simply protects the property while the facts come to light. Then he placed the draft forgeries on the judge's desk, one by one. The judge picked up the papers and adjusted his glasses. He stared at them for a long time. You could hear the shuffle of Olivia's nervous hands in the back. Whitman tried to object, sputtering something about family privacy, but the judge raised a hand. I've seen many forgery cases, he said slowly. I can tell when someone has practiced a signature. He looked up at my parents. This does not look good. Mom's face flushed crimson. Dad's hands tightened on the table. Then Mason called Mr. Jenkins, our neighbor, to give a short statement. The old man shuffled to the front, hat in hand, and in his soft coastal drawl said, I saw the truck. Saw her father talking to the movers. She wasn't there. She was in Boston. I remember because she waved to me the day before she left. Simple, clear, devastating. Whitman tried to cross-examine him, but Jenkins just smiled kindly, like someone who'd lived too long to care about tricks. The judge didn't take long. Motion for injunction is granted, he said. The boat will remain in the buyer's storage facility under court order. Neither party may transfer, sell, or modify it pending the outcome of the case. Mason gave me the slightest nod. Step 1, secure the asset. Mom gasped like the air had been punched out of her. Dad muttered something under his breath, probably a threat, but the bailiff's glare shut him up. When the session ended, Whitman approached Mason for a quick sidebar. Their voices were low, but I caught fragments. Damaging settlement talk. Only if full restitution. She's serious. Yes, I was. As I left the courtroom, reporters were waiting outside. Not the tabloids, just a couple of local journalists. One of them asked, Esmeralda, how does it feel to get the injunction? I didn't stop walking. It feels like justice is starting to catch up. That night at home, my phone buzzed with Olivia's message. You were incredible today. Dad's furious. Mom's pretending it didn't happen. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't felt incredible. I'd felt hollow, like I'd finally spoken a truth I'd been holding in my whole life. Then another message came. He slipped up after court. He called me and said, if Esme wants war, she'll get it. I have leverage she doesn't even know about. My blood ran cold. Leverage? Whatever my father thought he had, I knew this. The moment he said it out loud, the ground beneath him started to crack. And I was ready to make it collapse. The night after the injunction hearing, I barely slept. My father's words echoed in my head like a siren I couldn't shut off. I have leverage she doesn't even know about. It wasn't empty bluster. He never made threats unless he already had a plan. By morning, Mason had already scheduled a strategy call. He's bluffing, he said at first. They're trying to make you nervous, typical intimidation. But I shook my head. No, my father doesn't bluff. If he says he has leverage, it means he's holding something. We started combing through possible angles. Financial? Unlikely, my accounts were clean. Personal? Also unlikely. I'd lived a pretty boring life outside of this case. Property? Maybe. Then Olivia called, her voice was shaky. "Esme, Dad's planning something. He met with a private investigator last week. I overheard him on the phone saying, we'll bury her with her own signature." "Does that make sense to you?" My blood ran cold. "He's going to fabricate something else," I whispered. Mason leaned closer to the phone speaker. "Liv, did you hear anything else? Dates, names, what kind of document?" "Something about a trust, from Grandpa's estate. He said if you go too far, he'll remind the world who really deserved the inheritance." "The trust? Of course. Grandpa's estate had a trust fund set up years ago, one that was meant to benefit me and Olivia equally. But I'd never seen the actual distribution documents. Dad had always handled the paperwork." Mason's eyes narrowed. "If he's hinting at trust documents, he's either planning to reveal something legitimate or he's going to forge something else." I clenched my fists. "Then we find it before he does." That afternoon, Olivia met me at the house while my parents were out. She'd been hesitant to cross that line before, but something in her had shifted after the hearing. She moved through the study like a shadow, pulling out drawers, flipping through dusty folders. "I went for Dad's old roll-top desk, the one he kept locked." Olivia found the spare key taped behind a framed photo. Typical. Inside were rows of neatly labeled folders. Taxes 2016, Vacation HOMES, JNKINS boat sale, that one made me snort, and then Kane Trust original. My heart pounded. I opened it slowly. Inside were the original trust papers from Grandpa's lawyer. And there it was in black and white. "The trust shall distribute all assets equally to Esmeralda Kane and Olivia Kane upon the death of the trustee. Any sale or transfer of assets requires both signatures." It was clear. No ambiguity. Equal split. Dual consent. Tucked behind the document, though, was something else, a draft amendment dated 6 months ago, purportedly signed by me. It stated that I waived my right to certain assets, including the boat, in favor of Olivia. And the signature, it was eerily familiar. Not mine, another forgery. I stared at the page, trembling with equal parts fury and awe. "He forged a trust amendment," I whispered. "He was going to use this as leverage." Mason's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Photograph everything. Don't move the originals. We'll subpoena the trust attorney to verify whether that amendment was ever filed. If it wasn't, this isn't leverage. It's a bomb waiting to explode in his hands." 2 days later, Whitman sent Mason a letter. "Our clients have obtained a trust amendment that indicates Ms. Kane waived her rights to certain assets, including the contested property. Should Ms. Kane pursue this lawsuit further, we will not hesitate to make this amendment public." Mason grinned when he read it. "Perfect. They took the bait." "What bait?" I asked. "This proves they're going to rely on that forged amendment as part of their defense. Introduce it, and we can prove it's forged, which we can. It doesn't just undermine their case. It could open them up to criminal liability." For the first time in weeks, I felt adrenaline instead of dread. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced in his immaculate blazer like he was closing a business deal. "Esme," he said smoothly, "I think it's time we stop this nonsense. We both know this case will destroy the family. But there's a way out." I folded my arms. "I'm listening." He pulled out a crisp manila envelope and placed it on my coffee table like a weapon. "Sign this withdrawal. Drop the case. We'll revisit the trust and make sure you're taken care of." I didn't touch the envelope. "You mean the trust you tried to rewrite with a forged amendment?" His eyes flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough. "You think you're clever," he said quietly, "but you have no idea what you're walking into. When this amendment comes out, people will see the truth, that you gave up your rights years ago. You'll look greedy, vindictive, I'll make sure of it." I leaned in, steady and cold. "Then do it, introduce it. Because the moment you do, we'll subpoena the trust attorney, the notary, the filing dates, and the forensics on that signature. You'll bury yourself, Dad." His jaw clenched. He wasn't expecting that. I stood up. "You should have remembered something, Dad. You taught me how to fight. And now you're about to find out I learned well." Mason moved fast. Within 48 hours, he filed a supplemental evidence notice, alerting the court to the existence of the alleged amendment and formally requesting all trust-related filings. He also quietly contacted the original estate lawyer. The lawyer's response was gold. No such amendment was ever filed or received. If someone produced a copy with Esmeralda's signature, it's not from us. It was over before it began. But the twist was clear. This had been their leverage, their big secret. A forged trust amendment meant to paint me as greedy and dishonest. Instead, it became Exhibit A in their unraveling. That night, Olivia came over with takeout, exhausted but smiling for the first time in weeks. "You flipped it on them," she said, curling up on my couch. I thought Dad was going to explode after you refused his deal. He's not used to losing control. Neither am I admitted. But it feels different this time, like the ground is shifting, she nodded. It is. We sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights blink outside. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to my parents. I was strategizing ahead of them. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war on my terms. The day the trust amendment letter went public, everything changed. I hadn't leaked it. Mason hadn't either. But somehow, a family insider slipped a redacted version to the local press, along with carefully crafted statements that made me sound like a greedy traitor. The headline read, "Kane family rift deepens. Daughter accused of betrayal over inheritance amendment. They didn't publish the full amendment, only excerpts designed to make me look like I once signed away my rights, then changed my mind when money was on the line." Dad's quote was front and center. "We love Esmeralda, but she's forgotten what family means. We only want what's fair. This has broken our hearts." Mom's was worse. "She's not the daughter we raised. This isn't her. She's being manipulated by outsiders." It felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. By noon, my phone was flooded. Old classmates, distant cousins, even people from the yacht club I hadn't spoken to in years. Some messages were curious, others venomous. "Wow, Esme. Didn't expect this from you. How could you do this to your parents? Is it true you forged your own signature to take the boat back?" I shut my phone off. For an hour, I just sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. This was exactly their specialty, not winning arguments but controlling narratives. Mason found me like that when he stopped by. He took one look at my face and said, "They went public, didn't they?" I slid the newspaper toward him. He read the headline and smirked. "They just shot themselves in the foot." I stared at him. "Excuse me," he tapped the page. "This amendment isn't real, and now they've spread it publicly. You know what that means: defamation, discovery on the leak, and the opportunity for us to control the narrative with facts. You wanted justice? This is the spotlight." I exhaled slowly. "So we fight them in court and in public." "Exactly," he said, "but we do it smart, controlled, no emotional outbursts. You don't owe the world your pain, but you can show them the truth." 2 nights later, I agreed to sit down with Harper Lane, a respected local journalist I actually trusted. She wasn't sensationalist, she cared about facts. We met at a quiet cafe after closing hours. Her recorder clicked on. "Esme, you don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with," she said. "But the public only has one side right now. If you want, we can set the record straight." For the first time, I told my story aloud from the beginning. Grandpa's boat, the forged signature, the shock of coming home to find it gone, the fake amendment. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. She listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification. When I showed her the photos of the forged drafts and the lawyer's letter confirming no amendment existed, her jaw actually dropped. "Can I use these?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Use everything." "But I'm not here to trash them. I'm here to defend myself." The article went live 3 days later with the headline, "Inside the Kane Legal Battle, Daughter Fights Forgery Claims, Speaks Out for the First Time." Harper didn't sensationalize. She laid out timelines, documents, lawyer statements. She even quoted the estate lawyer directly. "No amendment was ever filed. Any such document is not from our office." For the first time, the narrative wasn't theirs. It was mine. The comments were still brutal in places. People always pick sides, but something shifted. A handful of voices rose in my defense. "If what she's saying is true, the parents forged legal documents. That's not a misunderstanding. They sound manipulative, honestly. This is wild. Imagine your parents selling your inheritance and lying about it." It wasn't unanimous support, but it was balance. At home, my parents were furious. Mom called me, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you talk to the press? You're dragging our family name through the mud." "You did that when you forged my name," I said evenly. "You think people will believe you over us," she hissed. "We raised you. They know who you are because of us." "That's exactly why they'll believe me," I replied, "because I'm finally telling the truth you've buried for years." She hung up on me. Meanwhile, Whitman doubled down legally. He filed a motion to compel mediation, trying to portray me as the unreasonable party who refused to settle family disputes amicably. Mason shredded it in his response. "You don't mediate forgery," he said. "You litigate it." Still, the pressure campaign didn't stop. My father called extended family members, convincing half of them to publicly shame me online. A distant aunt posted a long rant about disrespectful children that went mildly viral in our small community. Olivia saw it all, and this time she didn't stay quiet. She posted publicly, I've watched my sister be lied to, manipulated, and betrayed by the people who should have protected her. I won't stay silent anymore. Everything she's saying is true. I found the forged documents. I saw the amendment. She's fighting alone because the rest of us were too scared. Not anymore. It exploded. Half the family tried to discredit her. The other half whispered behind closed doors, but the damage was done. The golden child had flipped publicly. The next court hearing was packed, not with press, but with curious locals and relatives who suddenly cared. My parents walked in like they still owned the room, but this time, whispers followed them. Mason leaned in as we sat down. "You feel that?" I nodded. The air shifted. "Exactly," he said. "Narratives win hearts before verdicts win cases, and right now, the tide is turning." That night, I stood on the pier, staring at the covered silhouette of Grandpa's boat. The ocean wind whipped my hair across my face. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving their storm. I was changing the weather, and they had no idea what was coming next. The first deposition was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in late September. The air was crisp, the courthouse buzzing with a kind of quiet electricity. Depositions weren't open to the public, but that didn't make them any less intense. This was where strategies cracked, lies slipped, and real leverage shifted hands. Mason had prepped me for days. "They're going to come after you hard," he'd said. "They'll try to paint you as greedy, unstable, vindictive. Stick to the facts, no matter how personal it gets." We sat in a neutral conference room downtown, wood paneling, pitcher of water in the center, a court reporter setting up her stenotype machine. On one side, me and Mason. On the other, my parents, Whitman, and their junior associate who looked like he'd been waiting his whole career to destroy someone. Whitman started like a snake, calm and deceptively polite. "Ms. Kane," he said, "would you agree that your relationship with your parents has been strained in recent years?" "I'd say it's been strained since they sold my property without my consent," I replied evenly. He smiled like a man waiting to spring a trap. "And before that?" "There was no tension," Mason objected mildly, vague, but I answered anyway. "Normal family disagreements, nothing like this." For 2 hours, they asked everything. My finances, my job, my personal relationships. They tried to twist old text messages, private family dinners, anything to make me look volatile, but Mason had trained me well. I didn't flinch. Then Whitman leaned forward with something new. His tone shifted, like a fisherman tightening the line. "Ms. Kane, are you aware of a joint account opened under your name and your father's approximately 5 years ago?" I frowned. "No, I've never had a joint account with my father." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, pages of transactions from an investment account I'd never seen before. My name was printed clearly at the top next to his. Mason's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get this?" Whitman ignored him. "Ms. Kane, these records show substantial transfers from this account to various family-related ventures, over $400,000 in total. Are you claiming you had no knowledge of this account?" My pulse spiked. "I never opened this account. I didn't even know it existed." Whitman gave a theatrical sigh. "Interesting, because your signature is on the opening documents, and several transfers were authorized under your name." Mason shot up. "We'll need copies of all original documents and forensic analysis. If she didn't sign these, that's another forgery." But Whitman wasn't finished. He flipped to another page, and my stomach dropped. A $50,000 transfer labeled Boat Restoration Fund, ESME. He looked at me like a wolf baring its teeth. "Would you care to explain this transfer, Ms. Kane? Because it appears that the very boat you're suing over was partially funded through money you yourself authorized from this account. Funds that belonged in part to your parents. Doesn't that complicate your claims?" I froze. I had no explanation, because I'd never authorized anything. Mason called for a break. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the cold wall, my hands shaking. "Is that real?" I whispered. He was already scanning the copies. "The account exists. But look at this." He pointed to the signature on the account opening. It was my name, but it was the same neat, overpracticed script I'd seen on the forged amendment. "They forged it," I breathed. He nodded. "They opened a joint account in your name, funneled money through it, and then used that to claim partial ownership of the boat. It's sophisticated. This is their real leverage." The twist wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial. The afternoon deposition was my father's. Watching him under oath was like watching a master manipulator in his element. Calm, charming, measured, he answered every question with the polish of a CEO, until Mason brought up the joint account. "When did you open this account, Mr. Kane?" He adjusted his cufflinks. 5 years ago. With Esmeralda's consent?" Of course, he said smoothly. She wanted to help with family investments. She signed everything. Mason's eyes gleamed. And were those signatures notarized? My father hesitated just long enough. They were witnessed. By whom? A family friend. Name. He named a man I'd never met. Mason leaned in. We will subpoena every document, every witness, and every notary involved in this account. And if we find that signature is forged, and I'm confident we will, you're looking at far more than a civil suit. For the first time, I saw it, a flicker of genuine unease in my father's eyes. That night, Mason laid it out plainly. This is the twist, Esme. This account is what they've been building toward. They'll argue that since you co-owned the account, the boat sale was partially funded with your money and theirs. They'll try to blur ownership lines, make the judge see it as a family asset, not your individual inheritance. If we don't knock this down, it could muddy the entire case. I stared at the copies spread across my kitchen table. $400,000 of transactions. My name plastered everywhere like a ghost signature. Can we prove it's forged? I asked. Yes, he said, but it won't be quick. We'll need forensic handwriting experts, bank subpoenas, testimony from the account officers. It'll open a new front in the war. I took a deep breath. Then we open it. Olivia came over late that night, hair tied messily, still in her work scrubs. She sat down across from me and stared at the papers. He used your name to build their financial empire, she whispered. And you didn't even know. I nodded slowly. Now I do. She looked at me, eyes fierce. Then burn it down. I smiled grimly. That's the plan. The morning after the deposition, I woke up with that folder still on my kitchen table, the one with my forged signature on the secret joint account. The papers looked almost ordinary in the early light, like any other bank statements, but I knew better now. This wasn't just paperwork. It was the spine of their entire scheme. Mason called me early. We're not going to attack this head-on, he said. Not yet. We're going to peel it slowly. Subpoenas take time, and if we tip our hand too fast, they'll start covering tracks. So for now, quiet, strategic, let them think we're shaken. I liked that plan. It felt controlled. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their lies, I was following the trail they accidentally left behind. The first step was simple. I went to the bank. I didn't walk in like someone ready for war. I wore a neutral outfit, tied my hair back, and spoke like a curious account holder checking on a forgotten file. The branch manager, a middle-aged woman named Denise, was polite but guarded. I just need copies of any joint accounts under my name, I said. She typed my name into the system. Her eyes flickered. Yes, we do have something opened in 2018. She slid a paper toward me to confirm my identity. When she printed the records, I saw the signature on the original application. There it was again, the same careful, unnatural penmanship that haunted every forged document in this case. Can I get certified copies of all of these? I asked. She hesitated. I can only release statements. For the original application, you'll need a subpoena. Mason expected that. Good, he said when I told him. We'll file it quietly. No drama. The second layer came from Olivia. She'd been quiet since the deposition, shaken by the financial revelations. But one night, she came over carrying an old leather folder she'd found in the attic. I was looking for my high school yearbooks, she said. Found this instead. Inside were letters, old, yellowed, with the logo of a small investment firm. They were addressed to Dad, dated between 2017 and 2019. Most of them were routine, dividend updates, fund statements, but one caught my eye. It was a notice of joint authorization renewal stating, per Esmeralda Kane's request, the joint account authorization remains in effect for the coming year. Please retain her signature for reference. I laughed out loud. I was living in New York that year. I hadn't even visited home during that period. Olivia's face hardened. He used your name like a tool. No, I said slowly, fingers tracing the forged signature. Like a shield, this account wasn't just about money, it was about building a paper trail that made me look complicit. Mason filed the subpoena for the original bank application and all correspondence quietly. We didn't make any noise, no press, no legal theatrics. Meanwhile, the family remained confident. My father started parading his evidence among relatives, smugly hinting that I was about to be exposed as a hypocrite. He even gave a thinly veiled quote to a local paper. Sometimes people forget the deals they made when it suits them. I said nothing. I wanted him to be comfortable, arrogant. Weeks passed. The bank slowly began releasing documents under court order. Mason and I spent hours at his office poring over every line. And then we found it. Buried in the middle of a routine monthly statement was a wire transfer for $200,000 to a shell company registered in Delaware, Kane Maritime Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of it. Mason tapped the page. This company was formed 6 months before the boat was sold. I leaned closer. And I bet you anything my father's the principal. He grinned. Already checked. He's listed as managing partner. And because this transfer came from an account under your name, they used your identity to capitalize the company that technically bought the boat. My chest tightened. So on paper, I funded the buyer of my own boat. Exactly, Mason said. They didn't just forge your signature. They built an entire financial ecosystem around it. This changed the game. Instead of going for a big flashy legal attack, Mason began assembling a forensic financial timeline, a meticulous web of transfers, signatures, corporate filings, and forged authorizations. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. My father didn't just sell my boat. He used my forged identity to fund a company, buy it, and launder family assets through that structure. At home, the tension thickened. Olivia overheard a late-night argument between Mom and Dad. "He's digging," Mom hissed. "They know about the Delaware account. They have nothing concrete," Dad snapped. "And if they get too close, we'll say she agreed to everything years ago. No one will believe she didn't know." Olivia told me everything the next morning over coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing in her world. "He's not scared yet," she said, "but he's starting to sense the walls closing in." I smiled. "Good, let him hear the footsteps." The final layer fell into place quietly one Friday afternoon. Mason called me into his office. On his desk was a freshly opened envelope, certified copies of the original bank application. He handed me the papers wordlessly. There it was, my name, my father's name, a notary stamp from a state I'd never lived in, and a signature that was mine only in shape, not in soul. "This," Mason said, holding the page like evidence in a crime thriller, "is the heart of their fraud. Once we bring in a handwriting expert and subpoena the notary, this entire financial web collapses. Slowly, precisely, like pulling out the keystone of an arch." I ran my fingers over the forged ink. It didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like a fuse, and I was ready to light it. The courthouse felt different that morning. Heavier. Like the air itself understood something irreversible was about to happen. This wasn't just another hearing. It was the financial disclosure phase, where both sides were required to submit every relevant document, no more hiding, no more strategic delays. If something existed on paper, it had to be brought into the light. Mason and I arrived early. He was calm, like always, but I noticed he'd brought 2 extra boxes of files. "They're going to play dirty," he whispered as we waited for the judge. "So will we, but our dirt is cleaner." My parents entered with Whitman trailing behind like a shadow. Dad's face was sharp, confident, even smug. Mom wore the same neutral mask she'd worn since the beginning, the kind that made strangers believe she was the wounded party. I didn't look away this time. The session began with routine submissions: bank records, trust documents, corporate filings. Whitman objected to half of ours, Mason objected to half of theirs. It was the usual legal choreography, parries and ripostes, nothing explosive. Until the judge turned to Whitman and said, "Counsel, where are the full transactional records of the buyer company?" Whitman stiffened. "Your Honor, we've already provided the Delaware LLC filings and payment records." The judge shook his head. The court's order was explicit. All contracts and agreements related to the sale, including side agreements. If they exist, they must be produced today. Whitman glanced at my father. For a moment, something flickered panic. Mason leaned toward me and whispered, "Here it comes." After a whispered exchange, Whitman reluctantly handed over a thick, sealed envelope. "These are privileged business documents," he said, his voice tight. The judge opened it, scanned the first few pages, then raised his eyebrows. "This is not privileged. This is a contract of sale with supplemental conditions." He handed copies to both sides. Mason opened it slowly, page by page. As he read, his mouth curled into a sharp, almost disbelieving smile. I took my copy. The first page was standard, terms of sale, purchase price. But the second page stopped my breath. Section 7, Supplemental Agreement. Upon successful transfer of the vessel, the Eileen, to Kane Maritime Holdings, LLC, the seller, Mr. and Mrs. Kane, shall receive an additional $350,000 payment to be deposited in a private family trust, contingent upon Esmeralda Kane's non-involvement in any claims or disputes regarding the vessel. Should Esmeralda Kane initiate legal action, the seller agrees to provide all personal and financial information necessary to discredit said claims in court and through the media. I stared at the page. My name, coldly embedded in a secret clause. They hadn't just sold my boat. They had sold me. Mason rose. Your Honor, this is precisely the kind of document the defense has been withholding. A side contract in which the defendants profit personally only if my client remains silent. And if she doesn't, they agree to actively undermine her case with personal data. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a scheme. Whitman stammered something about standard business terms, but the judge cut him off. This clause is extraordinary. You're telling me the sale price was tied to whether the plaintiff exercised her legal rights? Dad's jaw clenched. Mom looked down. I felt the courtroom spinning for a moment, but I gripped the table to steady myself. This was it, the thing behind their arrogance. This contract was the engine of the betrayal. Then came the kicker. Mason flipped to the last page. Attached was an addendum neither of us had seen before, handwritten, signed by my father and the buyer. If Esmeralda Kane challenges ownership, seller will ensure media portrayal frames her as unstable and ungrateful. Buyer agrees to delay payments until public opinion shifts favorably. I heard an audible gasp from the court reporter. Then the judge's face hardened. This, Mason said softly, almost reverently, is the smoking gun. The rest of the hearing was a blur of legal arguments. Whitman tried to claim the clause was never acted upon. Mason countered with a timeline of their media campaign, matching dates to the contract obligations. Every smear article, every quote, every leak, it was all scheduled behavior under that agreement. Olivia sat in the gallery. When she saw the contract, she pressed her hands to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, not because she was surprised, but because she'd finally seen it written. After hours of back and forth, the judge made his ruling. The court finds this document highly relevant. It demonstrates potential fraud, malicious intent, and coordinated efforts to obstruct the plaintiff's legal rights. It will be admitted as evidence. Further, the defense is ordered to produce all communications between the defendants and the buyer within 14 days. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. The judge fixed him with a cold stare. Sir, if you cannot control yourself, I will have you removed. For the first time since this began, his mask cracked. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Harper Lane, the journalist who'd interviewed me weeks earlier, caught up first. Esme, is it true there was a secret contract tied to your silence? I didn't hide this time. Yes, and now it's public record. I wasn't just fighting for a boat. I was fighting against people who tried to turn my silence into their profit. The cameras flashed. For once, I didn't flinch. That night, Olivia came over, still shaken. I knew they were manipulative, she whispered. But this, a contract to silence you? I nodded slowly. They turned my voice into a bargaining chip. She hugged me tightly. Then take it back. Lying in bed later, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment Mason read the contract aloud. All those years of being told to keep quiet for the family's sake suddenly made sense. Silence had value to them, but I wasn't silent anymore. And now, their own paper trail would finish what they started. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker that morning. Every chair was filled, reporters, distant relatives, curious locals who'd followed every twist like it was a TV series. The air buzzed with the unspoken knowledge that today was different. This was the final hearing before trial. The judge would hear closing arguments on the injunction, admissibility of the secret contract, and whether the fraud claims would go to full trial. Mason called it the pivot point. I called it the reckoning. My parents sat across from me. Dad's posture was still proud, but his eyes darted in a way I'd never seen before. Mom clutched her pearl necklace like it could save her from the walls closing in. Mason whispered as we waited, "They're going to go emotional today. Expect personal attacks. Stay steady." I nodded. My heart wasn't racing this time. It was steady, like standing at the edge of a cliff and finally deciding to jump. Whitman opened for the defense, but his tone had changed. Gone was the arrogance. He leaned on sentiment now, painting my parents as aging, confused people who made imperfect but well-meaning decisions. They never intended to harm their daughter, he said solemnly. They were trying to manage complex family assets while maintaining harmony. This has been twisted into something ugly by outside forces. He even gestured toward me at one point, saying, Esmeralda is a talented, passionate young woman, but she has misunderstood her parents' actions. This case belongs at the family table, not in a courtroom. The words almost made me laugh. Family table, the same table where they'd made every decision without me, forged my signature, and sold my inheritance behind my back. Then Mason stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace dramatically. He simply walked to the center and began laying out the timeline like a surgeon exposing a wound. The forged signatures on the boat sale, The secret joint account. The Delaware shell company funded with my stolen identity. The hidden supplemental contract tying their profit to my silence. Every piece landed like a hammer on stone. The room was silent except for Mason's voice and the soft click of the stenographer's keys. Then he turned to my parents. You say this belongs at the family table, but your family table is where you plotted, signed, and sold without her knowledge. That table became a boardroom where your daughter was a liability to be managed. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. Mason glanced at me, he hadn't expected that. But I stood, I walked to the podium. My hands didn't shake. I didn't want to be here, I said. I spent most of my life believing that if I stayed quiet, things would eventually be fair. That if I didn't rock the boat, my parents would remember I was their daughter. I turned to them. Mom's eyes were wet. Dad's face was carved from stone. But when I came home and saw that empty spot in the driveway where Grandpa's boat used to be, I realized something. Silence doesn't keep the family together. It just keeps the truth buried, and you buried me with it. I held up the contract. You sold my inheritance. You sold my identity. And then you sold my silence for profit. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is betrayal written in ink. The courtroom was still. Even Whitman didn't move. Then came the emotional twist. Whitman called my father to testify briefly, trying to reclaim some narrative. Dad walked up like a man going to give a keynote speech. But when Mason cross-examined him, it wasn't about finances. It was about intent. Mr. Kane, Mason said gently, why didn't you tell your daughter about the supplemental contract? He hesitated. Wasn't relevant to her. Not relevant, Mason repeated. Even though her name was written into the terms, even though your profit depended on her silence, she wouldn't have understood the complexity. Or, Mason said, stepping closer, you knew exactly what she'd say if she saw it. Dad's jaw tightened. I did what I had to do to protect this family. By forging her name, by selling her property, by turning public opinion against her. His voice cracked slightly. You don't understand. She always made things complicated. She questioned everything. She didn't trust us. And there it was, the raw, unfiltered truth. He didn't see me as a daughter, he saw me as a problem. Mom was next. Her testimony was less combative, but it cut in a different way. I just wanted peace, she said softly. Esme was always so strong-willed. We thought if we handled things quietly, she wouldn't get hurt. I whispered, you hurt me anyway. She heard it. Her face crumpled. For a brief second, I saw not the manipulator, but the woman who had chosen comfort over honesty. After the testimony, the judge recessed to review evidence. It felt like hours, though it was only 30 minutes. When he returned, the courtroom snapped back into focus. The court has reviewed the documents, including the supplemental contract, the financial records, and testimony. There is compelling evidence of forgery, fraudulent transfer, and coordinated efforts to silence the plaintiff. My breath caught. This matter will proceed to full trial on all counts. In addition, the injunction remains in place. The vessel and associated funds are to be frozen pending final judgment. A murmur spread through the room. My father's face drained of color. Mom covered her mouth. Olivia, sitting behind me, grabbed my hand. Mason squeezed my shoulder. You did it, he whispered. Outside, the press was waiting, but this time I didn't hide behind Mason. I stood in front of the cameras, shoulders back. I didn't choose this fight, I said, but I won't be silent anymore. Not for money, not for appearances, not for family who forgot what that word meant. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who came home to an empty driveway. I felt like the woman who built her own foundation under the wreckage, and the real trial hadn't even begun. The trial began on a gray morning in late September. The kind of morning where the sky looks like a blank page, waiting to be written on. I remember sitting outside the courthouse with a cup of burnt coffee, watching people rush in and out, and realizing how different I felt compared to those first hearings. Back then, every step into this building had felt like walking into a lion's den. Now, it felt like walking into my own story. Mason stood beside me, flipping through his notes. You ready? I smiled. I've been ready for a long time, I just didn't know it. The courtroom was packed, but the atmosphere was different now. The press wasn't looking for scandal, they were looking for answers. Olivia was there too, sitting a few rows behind me. She gave a small nod. The judge opened the trial formally, outlining the charges: fraudulent transfer, forgery, malicious interference, and breach of fiduciary duty. Hearing the list read out loud didn't make me feel vengeful anymore. It made me feel seen. For years, everything had been whispers, closed doors, family matters. Now it was all on record. Whitman opened for the defense, trying to paint my parents as misunderstood victims of a legal misunderstanding. But after everything that had surfaced, the forged signatures, the shell company, the secret contract, the narrative no longer held the same weight. Then Mason stood. His opening statement wasn't theatrical. It was clear, patient, and devastating. "This case isn't about greed," he told the jury. "It's about a daughter whose trust was used as currency. It's about documents that turned love into leverage. It's about whether silence can be bought and whether truth still matters in a family built on paper walls." I watched the jurors' faces. Some frowned, some leaned forward, but all of them were listening. When I took the stand, it wasn't the terrifying moment I once imagined. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Whitman tried to trip me up with emotional questions. "Don't you love your parents? Do you really want to ruin them? Can't this be solved privately?" I answered honestly. "Yes, I love them, but love without respect is just control. No, I'm not ruining them, I'm holding them accountable. It could have been solved privately. They chose silence over truth. I didn't." For the first time, the words didn't tremble. During a recess, I found myself alone in the hallway, looking at the reflection of my suit in the glass doors. There was no triumphant music, no cinematic slow motion. Just me. I realized this wasn't about winning. It was about becoming someone who didn't beg to be heard, becoming someone who could stand alone even if no one clapped, becoming someone who no longer mistook silence for peace. Back in the courtroom, Mason began presenting evidence methodically. Each forged document, each wire transfer, each clause in the secret contract laid out like a map of betrayal. My parents sat still, their faces unreadable. But I wasn't looking for regret anymore. I wasn't even looking for understanding. I was simply watching the truth take its rightful place. As the trial entered its second week, the courtroom transformed into something almost surreal. Every day, more details spilled out. Bank emails, notarized forgeries, invoices sent from anonymous accounts that all traced back home. The story that had once lived in the shadows of our family was now a public timeline projected on a courtroom screen. And strangely, it didn't make me angry anymore. It made me calm. Because for the first time, the weight wasn't on my shoulders. The truth was carrying itself now. On the fourth day, Mason called the buyer of the boat to the stand. A clean-cut man in a tailored suit, he looked more like a consultant than someone who had been part of a secret deal. Under questioning, he admitted to signing the supplemental contract. "Yes," he said flatly, "the sellers told us that if Esmeralda ever contested the sale, they would provide us with personal information to undermine her claims. It was part of the agreement." "Did you find that unusual?" Mason asked. He hesitated. "Unusual, yes, but profitable." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Whitman tried to claw back control, calling character witnesses to portray my parents as generous, misunderstood people. A former neighbor spoke about their charity events. An old business partner talked about their integrity. But the words felt hollow against the mountain of paper evidence. Even the jury looked tired of the performance. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Whitman called me back to the stand for redirect. I braced myself for another emotional ambush. But instead, he asked one quiet question. "Esmeralda," he said gently, "if the court rules in your favor, what do you actually want from your parents?" The courtroom went silent. Even Mason turned to look at me. I thought about it. Not the rehearsed answers, not the legal ones, the real one. "I want my life back," I said. "Not the boat, not the money. I want to stop living in the story they wrote for me, where loyalty meant silence and love meant compliance. I want to write my own story now." Whitman looked startled. The jury looked moved. And for the first time, I saw my parents' faces soften not from guilt, but from finally hearing me. Later that afternoon, during closing arguments, Mason was brilliant. He didn't just argue the law, he argued the heart. "This isn't a case about punishing parents," he told the jury. "It's about deciding whether betrayal should be buried under the word family. It's about whether silence is the price of love." Esmeralda stood up not just for her inheritance, but for her voice, and that matters. I didn't need to look at the jury to know he'd reached them. I could feel it, a collective exhale. That night, I went for a walk alone near the harbor. The sea was dark, restless, but alive. I hadn't been there since the boat disappeared. For years, that boat had symbolized everything I'd lost. But now, as I watched the water, I realized it didn't matter if the boat ever came back. I was here. I was standing on my own 2 feet, watching the tide roll in, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to hand me my place in the world. I was already living it. The jury came back after 2 days of deliberation. Those 48 hours were some of the quietest of my life. Not anxious quiet, peaceful quiet. I spent most of it at the little harbor cafe, watching gulls circle over the water. Olivia joined me sometimes Mason. But mostly, I sat alone, not because I felt abandoned, but because I finally didn't need anyone to hold me up. When the bailiff announced, "The jury has reached a verdict," the courtroom shifted like a held breath finally exhaling. I walked in slowly, deliberately, not as the girl whose boat had been stolen, not as the daughter trying to make her parents understand, but as myself. The foreperson stood. On the counts of fraudulent transfer, forgery, and malicious interference, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Esmeralda Kane. A wave of sound rippled through the room, gasps, whispers, camera shutters. Mason smiled softly beside me. The judge confirmed the verdict, freezing the trust and assets pending restitution, awarding damages, and referring certain forged documents for criminal review. It was everything I had legally hoped for. But strangely, that wasn't the part that made me emotional. It was the moment I looked across the courtroom and saw my parents. Dad sat still, but his face had lost its iron mask. He looked older, smaller. Mom's eyes were red, her hands shaking in her lap. For years, I had imagined this moment as some kind of cinematic victory, me triumphant, them defeated. But that wasn't what I felt. I didn't feel the urge to gloat. I just felt done. Like I'd closed a book I'd been forced to read over and over, and now I could finally set it down. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again. Microphones, flashing lights shouted questions. Mason prepared to shield me, but I raised a hand. I stepped to the podium and spoke clearly. This case was never about revenge, it was about truth. For years, I stayed quiet to keep the peace, and it cost me my voice. Today isn't about destroying anyone, it's about choosing myself. The crowd hushed. I smiled faintly. Family isn't about silence, it's about honesty. And sometimes, honesty means walking away. And with that, I walked down the courthouse steps into the crisp autumn air. No cinematic music, no applause, just the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes and the feeling of lightness. A month later, I stood by the harbor again. The lawsuit had wrapped. Restitution was underway. Mason moved on to other cases, but we still grabbed coffee sometimes. Olivia and I were slowly rebuilding something real, not out of guilt, but out of choice. The boat was technically mine again now. But when the papers arrived, I surprised everyone. I sold it, not to spite anyone, but because I didn't need it anymore. That boat had been the anchor tying me to the past, and I was done anchoring myself to old betrayals. I used part of the money to buy a small, weathered house near the water. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The rest went into starting a marine conservation nonprofit, something I'd dreamed of before all this chaos. On the day I moved in, I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sea was calm, painted in soft gold. I thought about Grandpa, about my younger self, about every time I'd swallowed my words to keep the family peaceful. Then I whispered to the wind, "I'm not silent anymore." And for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel heavy. It felt like freedom.